Shalom, everyone. Welcome back. We're all very concerned, obviously, about what's going on in Israel today with all the violence and the rockets and everything. And they say it's one of the worst situations that's ever been. Things are happening in Israel right now, and things have been happening for the last couple months that are very amazing. Many cases very, very sad. What happened in Meron a few weeks ago in Lag BaOmer, 45 people. That was terrible, horrible. At the same time, what happened with the coronavirus in Israel was a modern day miracle that Israel is being lifted up before all the nations of the world as one place where they got rid of the virus and where people are back to normal. It's an amazing thing. About a month ago, also in close proximity, Israel recognized reform and conservative conversions that are not done according to Jewish law, which could cause the Jewish people irreparable damage, major damage as well. I was reading an article. Recently the Pew report came out, a new Pew report, PEW, which is a study of the American Jewish community. And in the report, there's some very, very troubling facts. Among them, the acceptance of intermarriage between Jews and non-Jews among the Jewish community. That many of the Reform rabbis and conservative rabbis today are even not Jewish. They are not Jewish. They are products of intermarriages where their mother was not Jewish. They converted not according to halacha, and they are presiding over Reform and conservative congregations, and they are coming along and saying that intermarriage is okay, and in fact we should even welcome intermarried couples, and we should accept non-Jews into the Jewish community. And it's a big mess. It's a major mess. What's going on today in the Jewish community, both in America and in Israel, is at one time something to be very, very concerned about. Never in history have we ever had a situation where non-Jews are becoming accepted as Jews, where non-Jews are serving as rabbis, even, where people are being killed, where there's violence on the streets as never before. Amazing things going on, but at the same time, the virus has been completely eliminated in Israel, and people are openly walking around free of the virus. So we want to know what's going on, what's happening to this crazy world of ours, what's happening in Israel, what's happening in America, and what are the repercussions for Jews. So let's talk today about what the Rebbe's response was to all of these various things. Even the Rebbe passed away many years ago, but let's talk about the Rebbe's teachings. But before we do, I'd like to start with the 2 chapters of Tehillim that we should say in support of our brethren in Israel, that they should see the light and they should do teshuvah, and they should overcome all the difficulties. We'll start with Kapitel Chaf, the 20th chapter of Psalms. We'll say it in Hebrew. You can join together with me if you can get your own Tehillim, and we'll recite it together. Lamanatzeach Mizmor LeDavid Yan Chadnai B'Yom Tzara Yisakev Hashem Elohei Yaakov Yishlach Ezra HaMekodesh U'Mitzion Yisadecha Yizkor Kol Minchosecha V'Ulas Yidas Sela Yiten L'cha Kilvavecha V'Kol Asascha Yimalei Neranna b'Yeshuasecha b'Shem Eloheinu Nidko Yimalei Kol Adonai Kol Mishalosecha Ata Yadati Ki Yoshi Adonai Hoshia Mashicho Yanehu Mishmo Kadsho B'Gvuros Yesha Yimino V'Ela V'Recha V'Ela B'Susim V'Nachnu Shem Adonai Eloheinu Naskir Hema Karu V'Napalu V'Nachnu Kamna V'Dusad Adonai Hoshia HaMelech Yaneinu B'Yoim Kareinu. The last part of that psalm reads, some rely on chariots, some rely on horses, but we rely upon, invoke the name of God. They bend and fall, but we rise and stand firm. Lord, deliver us. May the King answer us on the day we call. We'll say a Shir Hamalos as well. We'll say a Shir Hamalos here. We'll do Shir Hamalos Mimamakim Karasicha Hashem. Here it is. Shir Hamalos. Shir Hamalos. Let's see, Shir Hamalos. Here it is, Kuf Lamed, chapter 130 in Tehillim. Shir Hamalos B'malkim Karasicha Adonai Adonai Shema V'Kali Tiyezla Azlecha Kashuvos Hakol Tachanunai Im Avonos Tishmaya Adonai Miyamod Ki Im Chaslicha Man Tevarei Kivis Adonai Kivsin Navshi V'Loi Boi Chalti Navshi Ladnai Mishami L'Boiker Shaimim L'Boiker Yachel Yisrael Adonai Kiyam Adonai Chesed Barbai May produce V'Hu Yivtei Yisrael Mikol Avonosav. By the way, tonight at 6:45 San Diego time, California time, we're going to be having a Tehillim meeting here at our synagogue, which we're covering live on Zoom. You're welcome to join us in. Contact us through our website if you're out of town at chabaduc.org or through the KOLLEL Israel, and we will, together with the KOLLEL, be presenting a half-hour Tehillim meeting with prayers and the Torah for the community in Israel and for worldwide Jewish help. Keep that in mind. So what was the Rebbe's attitude towards Eretz Israel over the years? So the Rebbe's attitude was formulated based on a verse from the Torah, which says, Eretz, that's called, refers to the land of Israel as Eretz Asher Ein Elokecha Ba Mireshis Hashana V'Ad Achar Shana. That means that the land of Israel is a land in which the eye of God, Ein Elokecha Ba, the eye of God is upon it from the beginning of the year till the end of the year. God is always concerned about Eretz Israel. He's always worried about Eretz Israel and safeguards and protects Eretz Israel. It's no accident, therefore, that Israel won each of the wars that it fought in, beginning in 1948, where this new Israel, stood against tremendous foes, unbelievable foes from enemies, 7 Arab nations, and miraculously, with very few guns and outdated planes and armored vehicles, miraculously won against all those armies. It's a miracle. It's a modern day miracle. And Israel saw many, many miracles over the years, many, many miracles, including the miracle of Entebbe, where many Jewish and mostly Israeli passengers on an Air France flight in 1976 were unbelievably rescued from Uganda, from the wicked clutches of an evil regime in Uganda, and they were brought back to Israel, literally on eagle's wings. It was a miraculous mission by the IDF to rescue them, and only one Israeli soldier, Yoni Netanyahu, the brother of Benjamin Netanyahu, was killed in this action, and very, very few of the hostages died as well. I think only 2 of them died. One of them was in a hospital earlier. And it was an amazing thing. Many rabbis and many Orthodox Jews came along and criticized that mission, and they said that Israel should not have done it because it was done on Shabbat. The mission was performed on Shabbat. The Rebbe spoke up very strongly about that and said clearly that it was a mitzvah for them to go in on Shabbat, because on Shabbat, pikuach nefesh tochet, Shabbat, saving a life, pushes away Shabbos, and you're supposed to do everything you can to save a Jewish life. even certainly in violating Shabbos. The Rebbe pointed out at the time, I remember I was in New York at the time, I heard the Rebbe myself speak about this. He said that in halacha, in Jewish law, we are supposed to consult the experts about what to do in terms of saving a life. For example, he pointed out that if a person is ill, you speak to the best doctor you can find to cure that person, and you follow what that doctor, what that mumcha says. And what about a doctor? What kind of doctor should you choose? Should you choose a religious doctor or a non-religious doctor? The Rebbe pointed out that it doesn't matter his religiosity, only his expertise in medicine. You follow the best doctor you can. And if two doctors disagree, you get a second opinion. If two doctors disagree, then you follow the opinion of a third mumcha, a third expert. Ideally, the experts should be experts that care about you. They're not just doctors or robots, but they are mumchim. They are experts, mevinim yedidim. They are experts, mevinim. They are experts, yedidim, but who love you, who care for you. So you should find doctors that have a personal interest in you, that care for you, but at the same time they're experts. In the way of a country and saving lives in a country, who are the mumchim, who are the experts? The Rebbe points out these are the generals, the ones who are experts in war and in battle. And clearly the experts, the mumchim, at the time of Entebbe, told them, even though it was on Shabbos, to go and rescue these people, because that is the best thing. And the mumchim in Israel, the generals in Israel, have always said, by and large, the majority of them have always said what is right for Israel. And what is right for Israel is, A, don't give away any land. That the land of Israel is precious for the Jewish people, not just because it is holy and because God gave it to us. That is a very important aspect, obviously. But the generals were primarily concerned about security. And they always felt that giving back land in Israel would endanger the security of the people of Israel. And that's what they believe. Generals have always believed that. The majority of them. Some of them obviously were more motivated by political considerations. But the majority of the generals of Israel have always felt that it was a dangerous situation to give back even 1 inch of Eretz Israel. And over the years, they have been proven correct. Certainly over the years, when we gave back during the Six-Day War, the land that Israel acquired during the Six-Day War, the Sinai, and parts of the north of Israel, when the generals wanted to go in 1967, they wanted to go to Damascus, and the Israeli troops were only, I believe it was 26 kilometers from Damascus. It was the politicians that held them back. If they would have gone into Damascus today, we would not have the problem in Syria that you have today. Clearly, they would have demobilized the country. They would have completely changed the country around. But indeed, today, the problems we're having in Syria can be directly connected to the fact that the Israelis did not go into Damascus and take over Damascus even for a short while. It was clearly because of that. And today the world itself, not just Israel, but the entire world, is subject to the problems of the Syrian refugees and all the problems of that, and the hundreds of thousands of people who have been killed in Syria, all because Israel did not go into Damascus in 1967. And clearly the Rebbe was right about that. Obviously, we see it today. The Rebbe also believed very much that they should not have given back any of the land in South Lebanon. That was a major mistake on Menachem Begin's part in 1982, when Israel unilaterally withdrew from the south of Lebanon and allowed the Hezbollah soldiers to come in to take over. to murder many of the Lebanese Christians who were allies of Israel and who were protecting Israel from the south of Lebanon. And Hezbollah came in with many more wars and fighting and killing and rockets from the north, all because Israel retreated from Lebanon. A major, major mistake, a huge mistake. And then later on, Israel retreated from Gaza. Another major mistake that Ariel Sharon made, a tremendous mistake, as we're seeing today with the rockets and with the tunnels and the terrorism that are coming from Gaza. They should never have left Gaza. I understand, and the Rebbe understood, that it was a very high price for the Israeli soldiers to leave Gaza. It was expensive for them. We had a lot of soldiers in Gaza that needed to be there, and it seemed the right thing to do at the time for many people. But the Rebbe was very, very strong against it, tremendously strong against it. Soon after that, Ariel Sharon had a stroke, went into a deep coma, as we know, and the rest is history. He never recovered from it. The Rebbe also told Menachem Begin, before he met with Carter in the Camp David Accords, the famous Camp David Accords, I believe it was 1977, that Menachem Begin came to see Carter and to meet together with, I think it was Arafat, Yamach Shemo, to work out a peace deal. So Menachem Begin went to see the Rebbe in private audience before these meetings, and he was very deeply touched, very, very deeply touched. When he came out of the Yechidus with the Rebbe, the private meeting with the Rebbe, the Hasidim asked him what happened in his meeting, and he refused to disclose what the Rebbe spoke to him about, but he did say that he was very moved, very touched by the Rebbe and by the bracha that the Rebbe gave him, and he went to Camp David, and the pressure that he went through by the American president was so enormous for him that he capitulated, and he gave back vast amounts of land that Israel had seized in the Six-Day War, including the entire Sinai Peninsula. We remember the communities of Yamit on the Mediterranean in the Sinai that eventually Israel gave back to the Arabs. It was a major, major mistake, a tremendous mistake. They gave back Kutrin and many other places. It was a huge mistake, major mistake. Soon after that, Menachem Begin went into deep depression, and his wife died, and he left being premier, and he never recovered from his depression after that. And similarly, it was with Golda Meir. Golda Meir, during the war in 1973, Golda Meir waited until the Arabs attacked, even though she knew that the Arabs were going to attack. She knew exactly when they were going to attack. Israel has the finest intelligence in the world. She knew it, but she was afraid of American pressure. So she waited for the Arabs to attack before she mobilized the country. And it was also a major, major mistake, a tremendous mistake. We lost more Israeli soldiers in 1973 than in all the other wars of Israel combined. It was a tremendously bad decision. In 1967, Levi Eshkol also knew the date of the attack. So what did he do? He got up early in the morning, as they say, Yashkem Baboker. He got up early in the morning and he attacked the Arabs before they attacked him, as we're supposed to do in halacha. And the result of that was, of course, miraculous, but Golda Meir chose not to do that. And as a result of it, Israel almost lost the war, almost lost its existence as a result of it. I remember after the war, there was an inquiry, and Golda had to resign, and many generals who were opposed to this were dismissed But in reality, it was the high command, it was Golda, who put tremendous political pressure on the generals who knew better. And again, it was a major, major mistake, a tremendous mistake. Whenever Israel has done things like that, whenever they've given back land, the Rebbe used to speak about it all the time. Whenever they gave back land, there were dire consequences, both for Israel as a country and for its leadership who made these horrible decisions. And the Rebbe would speak strongly about it. There were rabbis, Orthodox rabbis, Haredi rabbis, who were opposed to the Rebbe's viewpoints and who felt that we should give back land in Israel because we should save lives, and saving lives is more important than land. That's what they said. The Rebbe was strongly against that, very, very strongly against that. And he said, by giving back land, it'll cost lives. Lives will be lost as a result of it. Whether you support a strong Zionist position or not, it's important to have the lands of Israel protected. And to do that, you need to be in possession of those lands, to station soldiers around those places. And that is the important thing, the important idea. So the Rebbe used to speak strongly about it. The Rebbe had a tremendous love of Eretz Israel, and he encouraged many of his Hasidim to go there, to establish communities there. In 1956, there was a terrorist attack in the young community of Kfar Chabad, the Chabad community near Tel Aviv. And it was a terrible attack. Many young people were killed in that attack. And the Kfar was decimated by it. At the time, Kfar Chabad was on the border of Israel and Jordan. It was now of course it's not, but then it was on the border. So it was easy for Arab terrorists to come in and to attack. After the attack, the leaders of Kfar Chabad wrote to the Rebbe and they asked him, maybe we should just dismantle the Kfar. It's too dangerous. We're putting too many people in danger here. And the Rebbe came out strongly and said, no, exactly the opposite. We should strengthen the Kfar. We should encourage more people to come. And he sent a delegation of several, I think it was something like 20 senior yeshiva students from New York to go to Kfar Chabad and to strengthen the community in Kfar Chabad during a time of great danger. But nevertheless, he sent these top students there to show the Jews of Eretz Israel, and especially the Jews of Kfar Chabad, that he stood with them, and they should grow and expand. And indeed they did. Right? Today, Kfar Chabad is one of the largest communities in Israel. It's a very large community. It's not a city, but it's quite a large village with many different divisions. And today, Kfar Chabad is far from the border of Israel. So the Rebbe was quite right in expanding it. Interestingly, the Rebbe sent, over the years, he sent American yeshiva students to Israel to support the Jews of Israel and to work towards expanding and building Jewish communities in Israel. At a time when American Jewish communities and European Jewish communities were not so much interested in supporting Israel. They were afraid. So what did the Rebbe do? The Rebbe took many of his top yeshiva students, senior yeshiva students. Some of them were married, some of them were almost married, of marriageable age, and he sent them to Israel. And they established Chabad communities in many, many different places, in areas of Yerushalayim, in Tel Aviv, in Tzfat, in Rehovot, in Eilat. At the time, Eilat was a very small community. They didn't have all the huge hotels that they have today. It wasn't a very large resort at the time. And then they were talking about the 1970s. I think it was around 1976, 1977. But the Rebbe sent these American boys there. Why did he send American boys? You would think the best thing would be to send Israeli boys. There were many Israelis who were studying in New York, in the Chabad Yeshiva. Why didn't he send them? After all, they spoke the language, they were more familiar with the ways, they were brought up in Israel. They would be more familiar with how things are done in Israel. But no, he chose to send Americans there. Why? Because Americans know how to get things done. Americans do not take no for an answer. Americans recognize a problem and they figure out a way to solve those problems higher than reason and understanding, and indeed that's what they did. These young students went out and they established communities and they created a beachhead for Orthodox Judaism in Israel, and they did it in a very, very smart way. The Rebbe was never interested in politics. He was interested, but he never got involved with politics in Israel. He did not allow any of his Hasidim to run for the Knesset. We never had Chabadniks running for the Knesset. Very, very rarely. And very rarely did Chabad support openly candidates for the Knesset, because we felt this was not our place to do that. There were others who were involved in that, who were representing our interests there, and we felt that it was not Chabad's interest to be involved in politics, because Chabad is interested in helping all people, religious, non-religious people, Datiim, Chilonim, every type of person. Getting involved in politics would give a bad taste in their mouth for Judaism. So we were never involved in politics. When people asked the Rebbe who to vote for in the election, the Rebbe never told them one party or another. He said, whoever is good for Torah, whoever is good for Judaism, whoever is good for Israel, that's who you should vote for. So there were Chabadniks who voted for all different kinds of parties. They felt which parties were best for Israel, because the Rebbe was concerned that Israel should be strong and Israel should be Jewish. Recently, there was a terrible tragedy that happened in Israel as well, only maybe a month ago, 2 months ago, and that is that the Israeli Supreme Court validated reform and conservative conversions, and this itself was a terrible, terrible, horrible thing. And this flies in the whole idea of the separation between Jews and Gentiles. This way, there is no separation. The Rebbe strongly supported up until 1972. David Ben-Gurion, when he established the State of Israel, he wanted to know what should be the standards for Israel in terms of marriage, divorce, and conversion. So he consulted the rabbis all over the world, mostly in America. He consulted the Rebbe and Rabbi Soloveitchik and Rabbi Feinstein and many others. And he came to the conclusion of something that he called the status quo, that Israel should be ruled by Israeli law, which is a combination of Turkish and British law in Israel and Torah law. But these three areas, marriage, conversion, and divorce, should be only ruled by the rabbinate, the chief rabbinate, and the chief rabbinate should only be Orthodox. Why? Why should it be like that? Because Ben-Gurion believed there should be one standard for everyone, one standard for all Jews in these regards. If you have different standards, then you will have a situation where you will have Jews who are Jews according to halacha, and Jews who are not Jews according to halacha. And they will not be able to marry each other. They will be separate. They will be different one to the other. And it'll be a horrible, horrible situation. Because if your child wants to get married, you don't know if they're Jewish or not. Just because their name is a Jewish name does not mean that they are Jewish necessarily. And it'll create chaos among the Jewish people, and it will cause Jews not to be together. It'll be a horrible situation. So until 1972, the rule was that Jews, only Jews according to halacha, Jews who were born to a Jewish mother, or who converted according to Orthodox Jewish law, according to halacha. 1972, the Knesset changed the law to allow people to convert non-halachically and to be accepted by Israel. Luckily, the Misrad HaPanim, the Ministry of the Interior, every year was by and large held by Orthodox rabbis, Orthodox Jews. So they did not allow the implementation of this rule. Nevertheless, if someone was married outside of Israel by a Reform rabbi, and they came to Israel with that conversion, they were accepted by and large. But they would not be allowed to be married inside of Israel. So that's why they would go to Cyprus or places like that. And while many people feel that pluralism is the way to go, that people should be able to convert or get married by whoever rabbi they want to, it is a major, major calamity, a horrible mess. Many years ago, I spoke to an old friend of mine that I grew up with who became a conservative rabbi. And he was a rather traditional conservative rabbi. And we had a conversation. And I asked him, I said to him, would you ever perform a marriage with two people where one of them had a Reform conversion? Would you do a marriage like that between a Jew born by a Jew as a Jew and the other one with a Reform conversion? Now, Reform conversions are not halachic. Why? Because they don't require mikvah. Sometimes they don't require any bathing, any immersion at all, or a swimming pool, or something like that. They don't require bris milah for a male, and they do not require adherence to halacha to observe the mitzvahs of Judaism. So their conversions are very, very, very liberal. What do they require? Simply that people should commit themselves to the Jewish people. They should help the Jewish people and consider themselves a Jew, but no commitment to change their practice in any way. I asked my friend, the conservative rabbi, if he would perform a marriage with a person who had such a conversion, and he actually told me no, he would not. He wouldn't do it. He would require them to have more of a traditional conversion. So I said to him, well, in that case, why should an Orthodox rabbi marry someone with a conservative conversion who also does not adhere strictly to Orthodox Jewish law? Why is that? He had no answer for that. Years ago, I had another friend who was a cantor in one of the larger conservative synagogues in San Diego. And he was a friend of mine. We used to learn together. And he grew up in a more traditional family. And he told me one time, actually several times, that he was very, very disturbed by something that he had to do as part of his duty. I said, what was that? He said, well, I had to be a witness for the rabbi's conversions. And it troubled him very, very much. Why? Because of the things he saw with these conversions. Among them, he saw that the rabbi would take the mikveh in San Diego would not allow conversions. So the rabbi would take the person either to a swimming pool or to the ocean. And sometimes the rabbi would say to the cantor, you know what, I have to go, I have an appointment. You stay here and just make sure they immerse. Or, if you have to go, don't worry about it. We'll take their word for it, or something like that. And he thought this was a joke. He thought this was a ludicrous way that he was not taking this conversion seriously at all himself. And it bothered him. It bothered him very much that sometimes the rabbi would watch the women who were naked going into the swimming pool, and his standards are very, very loose, and he would say to the cantor, hey, take a look at that woman over there. He thought it was disgusting. And this was his conversions that he was doing. So the conversions were a joke, the conservative conversions. So conversions that are not that according to halacha have no validity at all. They are not valid. They are not considered by Orthodox rabbis as kosher conversions. So the implications of this are horrible. These are people who are walking around with Jewish names, and they can become citizens of Israel with a Jew on their passport. I don't know if they still do that, but recognized as a Jew. And the confusion, the implication of that is horrible. Many years ago, there were, I think in the early 1970s, there was a wave of terrorist attacks in Israel. Terrorists were crossing the borders. They were coming through the sea along the shoreline. And many of you remember many of these attacks that took place. And somehow Israel was not able to stop these terrorist attacks. And they were coming one after the other. Israel positioned soldiers along the borders, along the beachheads, but still the terrorists were coming through. They didn't know what to do about it. The Rebbe spoke about it, about this very matter, and the Rebbe said clearly that if we do not safeguard the spiritual borders of the Jewish people, meaning the difference between Jew and Gentile, then the physical borders of Israel will not be safeguarded as well. And as much as we will try to safeguard the physical borders, as long as the spiritual borders have been breached, we will not be able to protect the physical borders as well. And perhaps that's what's happening today. We don't seem to be able to do anything about the situation in Israel today with the violence, and never before have we seen that there's such violence in Lud and other cities, in Tveria, other cities that are erupting in violence, that Jews and Arabs are fighting openly in the streets. Synagogues are being burnt down. It's horrible. It's terrible. And it doesn't seem to be anything helping. Israel is sending fighter planes to blow up buildings in Gaza, to kill leaders of Hamas, but it doesn't seem to be stopping the situation. Hamas is sending thousands of rockets into Israel. Where are they getting these rockets from? How is it that Israel's not able to stop these rockets, even with the Iron Dome? It's a horrible situation. Why is it? It's because the spiritual borders of Israel have been breached. It's because of the intermarriage, because of the non-Jewish rabbis that congregations have in their midst. It is a major, major calamity that's going on today. And as many of the rabbis are pointing out today, Israel needs to do tshuva. Israel needs to clean up its act and recognize that indeed the land of Israel is the land that God's eye is upon it from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. God is watching what's going on in Israel, in the Knesset, and in the streets of Israel. And God is shedding tears in a way that has never been happening before. We should only hope and pray that this should end, and that the leaders of Israel should see the light and see what's going on and recognize all of these calamities for what they are. And that is that God is looking down, and God is allowing these things to happen. So we should hope and pray that we should see peace in Israel, and we should see the Jewish people come back to Torah and mitzvahs observance. And through that, God willing, we will see the coming of Mashiach. And perhaps these are the imminent pains of Mashiach happening right now in Israel and throughout the world as well. Let's come to our senses, Jewish people, as the Rebbe used to say, and stop this as before it gets any worse. Shalom. Have a good week.
Shkol.